Hello and welcome to the Being and Becoming podcast. Together we are being honest in conversations about thoughts we're having and books we're reading, in the hopes of becoming better, more able versions of our current selves. My name is Logan. We're going to do our Shooting the Breeze segment, which has not been getting a lot of love thus far in the podcast. But this segment of the show is more open dialogue conversation. I'm joined today by my two regular co-hosts, Austin Stone and Patrick Dyer. But then we're also joined today by Mr. Ryan Schwartz, who will be our first guest on this segment. So thanks for coming on, Ryan.
Oh, of course.
So we've been doing quite a few episodes so far. We've realized, or at least been open to receiving feedback, compliments, disagreements, etc. And so Ryan hopefully will be on today to voice some of that with us. So Ryan is a friend of mine. We go back to college at Anderson University where we met. And then Ryan, if you just want to do a quick introduction of yourself, I think we can get things rolling.
Yeah, so like you said, name's Ryan Schwartz. Just to give a little background, I'll try to give just a quick overview of my life. I grew up in a conservative Christian home. I wouldn't say ultra conservative, but it was a conservative Christian home. For example, wasn't allowed to watch or read Harry Potter, stuff like that. I went to a Christian school, growing up a private Christian school. It was considered a Baptist school, but I didn't notice any theological leanings necessarily within that. But grew up in that K through 12. I did leave for 1 year to go to public school just to try it out and ended up coming back. But that's actually where I met Logan's wife, Peyton. She went to the public school that I ended up going to for a year, and then we also ended up going to the same church. But went to that school, also then graduated from there, went to Purdue University, had a crazy existential crisis, believed that I was being called into ministry, transferred over to a Christian college, and got a degree in Bible and religion. And then I went to seminary for a year before dropping out and just joining the workforce at that point. And I'm sure we'll get into the details on that later in this conversation.
Absolutely. That was a great overview, Ryan. Thank you for sharing. I also want to thank you just for, listening to the podcast. And I know you've definitely given me some help with editing tips and things like that. So it's very much appreciated. I just figured maybe we could get into maybe your thoughts so far on, what you've been hearing from us, maybe some takeaways. We can go down that route, or I'm not sure if you had anything more specific you wanted to talk about first, but we're just open to hearing you.
Sure. Yeah, I took a few notes. Since I knew I was coming on the podcast, I listened to some, took some notes. I'm that kind of guy. I guess just overall, I really enjoy your guys' podcast. I think there are some podcasts where they can have the same belief system and whatnot, but can be almost overbearing and almost pushy, where I find you guys do leave it open. You guys sound very open to other people's perspectives, even if they're different. That's why I was really excited to come on here, because I think it'll be a cool conversation, not one of those. I'm sure you guys might have had those talks with people where it goes nowhere. Everyone's just trying to change each other's mind, and we know that's not going to happen. And so I think it's cool. You guys give off a tone that is open and accepting. And so I appreciate it. And I like hearing the perspectives. I think everyone needs to, this is, again, my opinion, I think it is good for everyone to hear the different perspectives that differ from their own, and maybe even use stuff from them to inform their own. Just by knowing those, I think that information's very good. And so I kind of strive to hear other people's perspectives. I find myself listening to podcasts and whatnot that are ideologies that are different than mine, just so I can kind of learn more about it and understand my own perspectives, my own beliefs on things. Because knowing those helps me to determine why I believe what I believe myself. And I believe there's a lot of people that don't necessarily know why they believe the things they do. And so, yeah, great podcast, guys. I love listening to it. Hopefully we can keep up the weekly stuff, because I need something to listen to at work.
I resonate with that, Ryan, if I could just chime in for a sec. Because I think about, it's so easy to think about ideology that's different from yours, a religion that's different from yours, and forget that there's a human being there that came to that place, right? And I'm just trying to agree with you on the value of differing perspectives and remembering the humanity coming from them too.
And I will say too, sorry, I wanted to chime in with one thing. We're not very interested, I think, in debating in the classical sense of we're holding very strong to something and trying to win an argument. And I mean, it's kind of written into that mission statement too. We're more so just trying to be honest with what are we thinking about? Maybe what are the things that we grew up believing that maybe are based on what we're reading or what we're thinking about could be subject to change or subject to more scrutiny. I've kind of gone through that myself in like maybe some smaller ways, just as far as like being married, especially, you know, you kind of understand, why do I think dishes need to go here versus there? Like, no, it's things, but that's a small example, but something that's ingrained in you but you don't know why. I've just always thought this way. I think that's maybe more of the heart behind what we're trying to do. And honestly, another point of the podcast is just to connect with people that we haven't talked to in a while, which you and I haven't been talking regularly, but it's nice to like catch up. And this is a good excuse to do that. And then now I get to introduce you to my two good friends that are co-hosting. So I think that's really awesome.
Yeah, this is awesome. And I appreciate that. I don't want this to be a debate either. We know we're going to differ on things. Like, that's kind of assumed coming into this, kind of the reason that I wanted to come on this. But I'm sure we'll be able to find common ground and things. And you guys, from what I've heard, you guys are well read. And so I would appreciate point out my biases and assumptions that I have, because sometimes it's really hard to find them yourself. Like, that's I would true. Appreciate, like, point them out. I want to know what those things for me, where I was like, oh, I didn't think about that. I didn't realize I've had this assumption within me that I hadn't recognized. I think you guys would be able to do that, and I'll probably try to do the same if you're up for that.
Yeah.
First, I've got some notes from the podcast that I thought some would be fun to bring up. One, just a lighthearted one. Whose mom talks about kairos?
My mom.
Your mom.
Yeah.
Talked about kairos. It was a new interpretation of the word for me. I think you guys, a moment packed with meaning, that so much that it feels eternal, is what you guys had brought up. And I thought that was cool, because I mean, I only learned Greek in an academic setting, and there's almost sometimes less emotion involved, less of the artistic sense. I had some teachers that were better about that and having that emotional, artistic, like I said, sense to these words, but like knowing that it was just time, and I had only learned that it was an opportune time. There's chronological time, which was chronos, and then kairos was like the right time, the right time for something, the opportune time. And I always thought that word was really cool, and then you gave more meaning to it, which I liked it. I liked that. I thought I'd start with a little something I learned.
Awesome. Yeah, I'll have to let my mom know too, because she's, and I forgot to say, for people listening that maybe don't know, it was Logan's mom. Because I just said me, but then if someone's listening, they're like, who? So, Logan's mom.
All right. First thing that comes up in a lot of you guys' episodes is the ideas on nihilism. I think it comes up every episode so far. I think I like it. Again, I'm maybe not as well read. I know nihilism has to do like with there not being meaning to anything. Would I be correct in being very general?
Yeah, we joke about it too, because I think nihilism does come up almost every episode. But yeah, that's when we talk about it, that's how I understand it.
Okay. So I'll give a little bit of my perspective, because I don't know if I would say I'm a nihilist, but I do believe some of that to a degree. I don't know if I would say it's nihilism itself, but I do think there is no meaning, but at the same time, everything has meaning.
So maybe would that be closer to postmodern?
Oh,
like a postmodern
yeah, this is
belief?
good. Yeah, so I would say I'm very postmodern. Like, I have a lot of those leanings with postmodernism, but to the extent where I wouldn't say there is no absolute truth, but just that we can't know that we have it. Does that make sense?
So you're saying you don't necessarily believe there is an absolute truth? Is that correct?
I believe there could be and most likely is absolute truth.
I see.
But to claim that you have that absolute truth, I don't think you can prove or know for certain, 100% certainty.
Right.
Which I would consider absolute. I would say that you can't know that you have the absolute truth. There's got to be a sense of uncertainty, of doubt to everything that you believe. But again, it's to a degree. I say I believe certain things, but in reality, it's like it's more in my head probability. It's like, I think this is the most probable thing.
I think that's fair, especially with something like belief. If you were 100% certain of a truth, there would be no faith, there would be no doubt, like I think you're alluding to.
So
yeah,
it gets weird. I don't know right terms for the stuff that I believe, but to a degree, I think it's can be healthy to see a perspective in life where things don't have meaning. And it does sound depressing, but I found a sense of peace in this kind of I don't know if I'd say dualistic, but this view of nothing has meaning, and that freeing me from worrying about everything that I do and what its effects are. Like, if everything I do has meaning, that's a lot of pressure. I found a sense of peace knowing, like, I'm very small in this universe. Like, I'm just a speck, and even within time, I'm just a tiny little blip, as a lot of people would say. And so, like, to that perspective, there's not really much meaning in this limited amount of time that I have. But also, my brother likes to say zoom in and zoom out. That's his thing. So that's zoomed out, like, oh, we're very small. But zooming in, like, everything we do also has a lot of meaning. And, like, there is so much to this life in just the little things that are involved in it. Do you guys agree with that?
I think I could safely say postmodernism is kind of the water we swim in at this point. As the corruption of Christianity has become more and more obvious throughout the recent history, 400 or 500 years, that modern moral order has deteriorated, and now it's almost just as viable to believe anything, So like you were saying, Ryan, in this water we swim in, you really can't claim any absolute truth. That's not to say there might not be, but how are you ever going to know? It's kind of like an age of uncertainty. Do you feel like I'm summarizing what you were saying fairly well?
Yeah, I think so.
And then I just wanted to ask, I don't know if I'll say the philosopher's name right, but it sounds like you might have read Camus.
Maybe a little bit. It's been a while, though, if I have.
So he's very popular when it comes to, like, postmodernism because he agrees with that. And his books kind of wrestle with suicide because he talks about, everything means nothing, and it is a viable option to commit suicide. But guess what? You can create your own meaning is kind of where he's coming from. And I think a lot of people are turning to him because they are realizing the depressive state that postmodernism can leave you in, but then also kind of this reconstructionism, I don't know if that's the term, but it kind of seems like that's the appeal to go to postmodernism in order to kind of, okay, I can create my own meaning. I am my own creator of that.
So what would everybody's thoughts be on how do you find moral ground to stand on without an absolute truth?
That's a great question, Pat.
Ryan, do you believe that suffering and pain is real?
He went there immediately.
It's just a weird question because I know you could put it apart.
It's a good question. It's a very good question, though.
Okay, so the question is suffering and pain real?
I guess I'm asking if you think suffering and pain is an absolute truth. We'll start there.
Okay, interesting. Like the reality of suffering and pain. Yeah, I would say there is evidence that is a real thing, and I guess what I would like to go with, like, my whole idea of uncertainty, like, you could get really complex about things, just like having ideas of like what is reality and whatnot. Like, you could get really solipsistic and be like, I am the only reality, everything around me actually isn't reality. And then we create our own reality within our minds because it's just our senses, and our interpretations of what our senses are giving us is reality, not necessarily like what we think of the world. What we see is just a representation of reality, you know? Like that kind of, you could get really complex with it. But in my opinion right now, I'll say, yeah, suffering and pain is real. And to go to the moral question, myself, I like to live by causing and relieving, like causing the least amount of suffering and relieving the most amount of suffering is where I would find my morals to be coming from. I guess so. I would want to do things that don't cause suffering, but can also relieve suffering, which is also a complex thing and can be really hard. I don't know if you guys have listened to or read Ram Dass at all, but he talks about it a bit. He has a lot of talks that he did, but he found in his own experiences that a lot of times when you go to try to relieve suffering, there can be side effects that cause more suffering, and so it gets really complex trying to just figure out what to do to try to relieve suffering without causing more. And so I think thinking through that is where I would find my morals, and I guess that does believe in pain and suffering. Yeah.
So a quick distinction then would be someone else's interpretation of pain and suffering and its relation to meaning. If it's their own subjective choice, it immediately would shatter an idea of an absolute. So it's kind of really difficult to take that as like a solid stance for me. So it's just like, I definitely understand what you're saying though, and I actually don't disagree. But just speaking in the literal absolute term, I don't know if we can use that yet. Just due to subjectivity. Just a quick example would just be like cross-cultural things. Like I'm trying to think of a good example down here in the South, which sucks. Yeah, I talk a lot of crap about Texas on the podcast. Yeah.
Yeah, if we didn't mention, I live in South Carolina. That's where I'm at right now.
I forgot to say that up top. You're right, Ryan.
Yeah, so somewhat southern, at least more southern than my Indiana upbringing.
That's true.
It's a little different.
Hey, South Carolina barbecue's got to be fire, though.
It's pretty good.
That's what I hear.
I got a few places that I regular for sure.
Texas has been underwhelming, surprisingly.
Bummer.
It's like that's one of the things you hear about outside of Texas, how good its barbecue is. It's not bad. It's just
it is.
Shoot, Ohio had some good barbecue too. Anyway,
I guess what I was gonna say is when you brought up subjectivity, I almost believe everything is subjective, and I'll clarify what I mean by that. When I say everything's subjective, I think that everyone's experiences, no matter like what they're doing, everything is an experience, and that how we interpret all of our experiences is informed by our previous experiences, and no one has the exact same experiences. And so I tend to see, like, for example, you can look at one passage of the Bible and have a variety of translations, and like, well, most of the time that's what scholars do, is trying to figure out which one is the most accurate, and still they're just having the best guess because of all the subjectivity that goes into just interpretation. And everything I see, all experiences are just that, are just interpretation, and we all have our own. And that's why I tend to see everything as subjective, and almost see, it's hard to say that too, because I try to think of something that would be objective, but I don't think I can.
Could values be something that you were talking about individual experience? Could values be something that unify experience?
values unify experience between people, correct?
Right. Yeah, so say you and I have different experiences doing X, Y, and Z in our upbringings, but we could still, I think, value integrity or honesty,
Sure.
whatever it might be, that
Yeah.
could unify us to get along, be neighbors, or to work together in some sort of way.
Yeah, so that actually makes me think. I think objectivity can be achieved only within communities. Certain
I was going to
communities.
ask that.
Not
Great point.
globally, not universally, but within a community there may be a sense of objectivity because there are agreed upon, like Logan said, values.
Yeah. And Austin actually talks about, what do you say, Austin? It's something about localizing community. Do you mind kind of reiterating that or just
A
touching
little
on
out
it?
of its context, but I'll do my best. Just, localize your faith, localize your concern, localize your community.
I read a book in school. It was a book that most of the other students hated because it was so superfluous in a sense, but it was called Is There a Text in This Class by Stanley Fish. In this book, it was in my hermeneutics course, so I took a few hermeneutics classes at school. For the audience, hermeneutics is it's usually in relation to like the Bible or scripture, but in general, it's the study of interpretation, just generally how we interpret things. And so they teach hermeneutics to try to teach you best practices when interpreting the Bible, when studying the Bible, to interpret it in ways that are going to be accepted within communities. But within this book, it does kind of bring that up of these interpretive communities is the term that Fish would use. And the main gist of it, which this will be interesting, this is taking me off a different course, but the title of it being Is There a Text in This Class? He speaks about this idea that words, written text, don't inherently carry meaning. Meaning is only made by the people reading it. What do you guys think about that?
Is that mindset carried forth to speech as well? I'm assuming?
Yeah. So once it leaves your lips, that the sound in the air wouldn't necessarily have inherent meaning. But once it reaches those ears into the brain, that's where the meaning is created. So everyone creates their own meaning, I guess, is kind of like, I'm maybe butchering this guy. I'm sorry, Stanley Fish.
We do it all the time, Ryan, on here. Don't worry about it. But I think it reminds me of the story in Genesis, like the creation story. That's how meaning began, was through speech. Or are you saying, is it the person? Are you saying in your example, it's the person receiving, whether it's written or verbal, it's the person receiving that gives it the meaning?
Right. So in a sense, they wouldn't be receiving a meaning themselves. They wouldn't be receiving it. They would be creating it based on what they heard or read. So like words themselves don't carry the weight.
Mm-hmm.
So like it would be like the Bible itself doesn't have any inherent meaning within it. The meaning is the people reading it, is made by the people reading it.
Couldn't you then say that it means nothing? Because if one person chooses it's nothing. Not universally nothing, just to them. It's
Right,
nothing,
subjectively
so.
nothing.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I bet there's a bunch of people that think the Bible means nothing.
Yeah. I'd bet the most people probably.
Maybe.
Well, I think most people don't care. Like,
Yeah,
most people don't think,
That's true.
about
That's a better
like,
way to say it.
or rank order things. But I think based on, again, going back to communities or their own personal values, they're going to determine what's the most meaningful thing to me subjectively, or to maybe this company that I work for, or there's always like an aim or a desire when you're assigning meanings, I would say. Because like you're saying, Ryan, you can listen to someone and they can just be talking and you're like, please stop talking. You know what I mean? But if it depends on how are you interpreting it. But the optimist or idealist in me that would want to say that I think that there are inherent truths, like we were talking about with suffering, where, to your point earlier, your body still has to process that it's being hurt, or your heart's being hurt, your mind's being hurt. But I do think that doesn't take someone interpreting it. That's just inherently true, if that makes sense.
Sure. Yeah.
So the text in itself doesn't have meaning. It's the local meta experience of that community, right? This book would mean nothing to someone who doesn't understand English. So it's the English speaking, if we're going to talk in like actual real terms, it's the English speaking people interested in birds that this matters. And I think that you could kind of start talking about hierarchy there too. It's the hierarchy of that local meta experience that has come to that top. So, Ryan, do you feel like that's the closest you can get to objective, absolute truth, kind of? It's by saying local meta experience.
I think so. Like, and that's bound to change with time, but as of now, I couldn't say that there is any universal absolute truth, universal be it in the word, that everyone would agree upon. Because there's disagreement, like, I feel like if something's absolutely, well, that might be an assumption. I was going to say, if something's absolutely true, would it be obvious?
I would think probably yes.
Because if everyone believes it, like, if it's absolutely, well, I guess absolute truth doesn't mean everyone believes it, but if something is absolutely true and we can know what it is, wouldn't it be easy to get people on board with it?
I might be a little pessimistic on the, like, just human nature, because I think if we ever discovered utopia, the first thing we'd do is completely ruin it. So, but that's maybe my outlook just on humanity. But at the same time, I'm an optimistic person, and I want to believe that if there was something that was absolutely true, there would be at least some subgroup of people that were trying to share that truth, or trying to prove it, or trying to investigate it further.
What if I said there has never been a society? What if I absolutely said there's never been a society that successfully just worked without laws like do not steal or something like that?
Interesting.
I can't think of an example where that hasn't been the case.
Yeah, what's the definition of work, though?
Yeah, that's I thought of that too. I was like, I probably shouldn't have said that and just leave it at do not steal.
Do you mean function a way in which other people are prospering? Is that kind of what you mean by work?
Or rather, let's change it to there's no societies where stealing is an accepted good thing. It's always negative, and almost always, I'm assuming probably every society has a law against do not steal, or for the do not steal.
See, you can always make something more complex, which is where my head always goes to. So you say there's been no society, but we're just thinking of, like, let's go into it. This planet, the years that we've seen life on this planet. If we go into this weird, string theory stuff, what if there's multiple dimensions? There's infinite possibilities, but we wouldn't know. And that's where I always get caught up, is like, but there could always be this chance. Like, just because we can't know, there's always, even if it's a sliver of a chance, it can't be 100%. And that's what I would consider absolute.
So the only absolute is that there is none.
Is that we can't know it, for
Okay.
sure. I'm not going to say there's no absolute truth, because I think there definitely could be, but I wouldn't know it.
So, I guess, what would you call truth beyond a reasonable doubt? I think you said earlier that would be a probable truth.
Yeah, so my beliefs are what I think is the most probable at this current time, and I know my beliefs are going to change over time as I gather more experiences and deduce new things. So, and that's kind of what I consider being open-minded to be, is always having a sort of doubt or uncertainty towards your own beliefs, so that you are open to new ones if they are more probable, I guess you could say.
And that's healthy. That's just straight up good. I'm with that.
Yeah, we actually talked about, one of the last ones we recorded, we actually talk about one of the worst things you can do is think you have the whole truth right now, and you just hold on to the beliefs that you have, and then you're never going to be able, I shouldn't say never, but you're less likely to be willing to change if you think you know everything right now the way the world works, because it's so complex. We're looking almost right directly in front of us, and everything to the side we can't even comprehend, you know? We're stuck in our lane, and that's why whenever our car breaks down, it's so overwhelming, because now we're thinking about, okay, how does the engine actually work? Or how do I rotate a tire, when 99% of the time you're driving, that's not an issue. But so that's kind of an example to show us, like, even just in the way we go about our lives or how we think about meaning, we're just thinking about what's directly in front of me. I want to get my paycheck. I want to, live in a house with shelter and food. And when you start kind of branching out beyond, like, wherever your narrow-sightedness is looking at, because we can only think about so many things or look at so many things at once. And yeah, you have to be open to accepting that the thing that I'm looking at right now is good and it makes sense to me, but like maybe if I look a little more to the left, I'll see something that makes sense, or maybe I have to read this book, or I have to do this thing. And I don't want to be in 10 years the same person I am today, I guess is what I'm trying to say too, where there are things maybe right now I couldn't handle to learn, or I couldn't comprehend with my current knowledge, but with the way that we live and, like you're saying, adding experience, that's going to add to what we're able to understand or what we're able to do, and will hopefully make us better. So if we buckle down now and say we have everything we need, everything is complete for our lives right now, then that's going to be very limiting, I think, in the long run. Thank you for tuning into this week's Shooting the Breeze conversation. Please let us know if you have any suggestions as to books we should read or topics we should discuss by contacting us at beingbecomingpodcast@gmail.com. And by this point, you definitely know it, so I'm not going to say it again. We hope you join us next week for another conversation.